Hey everybody, it's Anna and welcome back to my channel. Today I am coming to you with the Classics book tag. This was an original tag created by the blog It's a Books World, and I will be playing a little bit fast and loose with my definition of classic in this video, partially because science fiction and fantasy is my favorite genre and there is like some debate over when that actually began as a genre proper, so I will be mentioning some books that were published more recently and then some books that fit the traditional definition of classic, which is like 18th, 19th century literature. I should also mention that about a year ago, I spent some time in a graduate PhD program as a research assistant studying 18th century transatlantic literature. So if this video skews a little bit towards the like American, British, English-speaking old world, that's just because that is what I know, it's what I'm very familiar with, and it's what I like to read. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and talk about the books. So the first question of this tag is, what is an overhyped classic that you didn't like? This will come as no surprise to anybody who has ever asked me about a least favorite book, but that award goes to Robinson Crusoe by Daniel Defoe. This is that story about a guy that gets shipwrecked onto a desert island and basically turns it into a colonialist, horrible, awful, narcissistic utopia for himself, I guess. I just think that the book is really annoying. I don't like the main character. It's told entirely from his perspective, so all we get is his first-person take on living on a deserted island. I guess maybe living on an island all by yourself for something like 20 years would make an asshole of anyone, but did you really have to go and pretty much enslave a native inhabitant of that island, name him after a day of the week, and then try not very hard to convert him to your religion, and then just conclude that he's really stupid when he points out the logical flaws in your argument? Yeah, I don't know. I just don't like that book. It is kind of important, though, because it's considered the first English novel by a lot of really important people that are a lot more qualified to speak on that than I am. However, having read it, I think 4 times now, the first was just like as a kid, you know, you want to read a shipwreck book, and then I was like, really? This is what it's going to be about? And then the other 3 times were for various courses, both as an undergrad and in graduate school. And pretty much those weeks of our seminars was me just taking a giant shit on Robinson Crusoe and how much I don't like it. All right, enough about that. Off onto something a little more positive. What is your favorite time period to read about? Itchy nose. Again, this won't come as a surprise to anybody, but I really like to read about the 18th century. So that is the century prior to the Victorian era. I think a lot of people get the 18th century and the 1800s confused. 18th century equals the 1700s. So that is one of my favorite time periods to read about. I really like to read books about prostitution during that time, like fiction, nonfiction. Those are really interesting to me. There's a book that's called Fanny Hill, which is basically like the first erotic novel in English that comes with a strong M for mature rating, by the way. That is not for the faint of heart or the easily squeamish. But it is just an interesting time because it's when novels were kind of coming into their own as a thing that people wrote and a thing that should be taken seriously by readers and was now going to be considered a part of art, whereas prior to that time, novels were seen as kind of derivative and silly and having a corruptive moral influence, and the real people read poetry. I guess not a whole lot has changed between now and then. The next question is, what is your favorite fairy tale? So this is kind of a 2-part answer. When I was a kid, my favorite fairy tale was definitely Sleeping Beauty. I think that was a little bit more the Disney Sleeping Beauty, though, than the actual book Sleeping Beauty, because I was really into Maleficent, and she doesn't really have any major roles in the written fairy tale. Now, I think my favorite is Rumpelstiltskin, because I think the premise of it is super scary, but I'm also fascinated by him as a character. He's so mysterious. Like, where does he come from? How does he get his powers? Why does he decide to help the miller's daughter all of a sudden? And what is he gonna do with the kid if he gets to keep it? I just have so many questions. I cannot wait for Naomi Novik's Rumpelstiltskin retelling. I think that's coming out in like June or July of this year. I will link it down below if I find it, figure out the title. But I have so many burning questions. Okay, number 4. What is the most embarrassed classic you haven't read yet? I think that means the one that I'm most embarrassed that I haven't read yet. And honestly, I have no shame. I'm not really a guilty reader. I read what I like to read. I have no problem sort of like not finishing books that I don't care about or feeling like I should read certain things to pick them up. Like, I have no time for that. Life is too short. I have to just read the things that I want and like to read. So I'm not really ashamed that I haven't read any classics. This makes a nice segue into the next question, which is the top 5 classics you'd like to read soon. I'm actually going to list off 6 of them because I have no shame and I can't limit myself to just 5. The list is a reread of Little Women. After being in the play last year where I played Meg in the musical of Little Women, I've been meaning to give this book a reread. I did reread certain passages of it in preparation for the role, but it has been some time since I actually read the book in its entirety. And this is thick AF, okay? Like, Louisa May Alcott got paid by the word, and there's a reason, let me tell you, that when this book was published outside of America, it's split up into 2 volumes. Did you know that? I didn't know that until I went to England. I went there for study abroad when I was a freshman in college, and I was like, what? There's a Little Women sequel? It's really just the second half of the book. They split it up in other countries for some reason. Not really sure why that is. Okay, next up is Cranachil, or Graveyard Clay by Martin O'Caden. This is an Irish classic. I believe I talked about this in one of my most anticipated reads, something like that, of 2018. Don't really know that much about this book except that everyone in it is dead. It's a classic of Irish literature. It's supposed to be dark and morbidly funny, and all of those things I am all about. This is The Left Hand of Darkness by Ursula K. Le Guin. This is a science fiction classic that I know has to deal with themes of gender and people being on other worlds. I believe it's part of a series. I'm not really aware of any other books in the series, but if I like this, I will probably read those other books. Next is The Last Unicorn by Peter S. Beagle. This is one of those modern classics of the fantasy genre. Peter Beagle is still writing lots of things, editing short story collections. He's still around. He's still alive. It's not an old classic. I never have read this, actually. I watched the animated movie. There's a scary, it's creepy animated movie from the 80s with Mia Farrow as the voice of the unicorn, and all I remember is the drunken skeleton that's guzzling his little carafe of wine, and the wine just going through his ribs and his neck and stuff. I don't remember anything about the story. I just remember being traumatized but also fascinated by the alcoholic skeleton. So let's figure out what that was all about. Next is The Sparrow by Mary Doria Russell. This is another classic of science fiction. Let's just read the blurb for this one so that I'm not saying I don't know too much about it. It tells the story of a charismatic Jesuit priest and linguist, Emilio Sandoz, who leads a scientific mission entrusted with a profound task to make first contact with intelligent extraterrestrial life. The mission begins in faith, hope, and beauty, but a series of small misunderstandings brings it to a catastrophic end. Dun, dun, dun! Space Jesuits is another favorite theme, as anyone that has heard me talk about Dan Simmons' Hyperion series will know. And yeah, I am looking forward to reading this very, very much. The last of the classics that I haven't read that I would like to, now you can actually see it, it's not super close to my lamp. Last out of all of the classics that I haven't read but would like to is The Parable of the Sower by Octavia E. Butler. I feel like this book doesn't really need any introduction. It's part of a series that she wrote. She is the mother of modern science fiction writers. This is happening. 6, your favorite modern book or series based on a classic. This is going to be a 2-part answer. I have a YA and an adult answer to this question. The YA one is Saving Hamlet by Molly Booth, which I've talked about in a previous video. It's an adaptation of one of my favorite Shakespeare plays. It's super sweet, has queer themes, love it. And then the second one I also talked about, this is an adult science historical fiction retelling book, and that is The Strange Case of the Alchemist's Daughter by Theodora Goss. This draws upon elements from the story of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, from Frankenstein, Rappaccini's Daughter, and Is there another one? Oh yeah, Island of Dr. Moreau. I also really like that one. Great book. Next up is your favorite movie or TV adaptation of a classic. This one is going to go to the Lizzie Bennet Diaries, which is an adaptation of Pride and Prejudice that was put out on YouTube a while ago. I actually wrote an end-of-term seminar paper about the Lizzie Bennet Diaries and modern adaptations of Jane Austen films, how they change sort of the narratives how they change the narratives. Okay. Number 8. What was number 8 and why did what is the worst classic book to movie adaptation you've ever seen? This one took me a while to come up with. For some reason, like, I have a very low threshold apparently for what I determine bad movies and television. You can ask my partner, he'll be able to tell you more about that. But I think this one goes to, there was this weird version, it was like a live action version of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe and the assorted books surrounding that I think aired on PBS. So this isn't the live action movie from like the mid-2000s. This was a sort of made-for-TV, very low-budget adaptation of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. None of the kids had any charisma, okay? I just remember that the girl that played Lucy was really loud, but that was about it. And Aslan was a like wooden lion on wheels that was sort of creaking and juddering as they moved it around. And there was like a little hinge on his mouth where you could see someone going like opening and shutting the mouth with like a little puppet string when he talked. It was really bad. I knew it then and I know it now. Worst adaptation of a classic I've ever seen. Okay, Your favorite editions of classic books that you like to own more of. This is again a two-parter, so just in general, I really prefer the Oxford World's classics. Sadly, I had to jettison many of them in my great Seattle moving across the country book purge of BookTube fame. Not really, it's like in 2 other videos. And then the others are the Penguin Threads and the Penguin in Bloom collections. I think these are mostly of books for younger readers. So the Penguin Threads has like these sort of embroidery sampler stitching type cover. And the Penguin in Bloom is like the ones that have these gorgeous sort of floral designs. They're very flowery and have these cute little pictures of the girls on them. I love those. I know that there's 3 others out. I believe it's Anne of Green Gables, The Little Princess, and maybe The Secret Garden. I'm not sure, but those are gorgeous. I would be happy to collect any and all of those. Okay, and then last but not least is an underhyped classic that you would recommend to anyone. And this goes to Northanger Abbey by Jane Austen, also my favorite Jane Austen novel of all time. This is a wonderful book for anyone that wants to read basically a satire of what we would now consider YA, written by the like OG satire author. So it's a satire of Gothic fiction and the way that this young, impressionable girl, Catherine, kind of lets her imagination run away with her because she's reading too many novels, quote unquote. But it's very self-aware, it's very tongue-in-cheek, it's a lot of fun to read, and it's very accessible. It's quite short. There is a romance in it. It isn't necessarily, you know, the flashy excitedness that people seem to feel about Pride and Prejudice, which for me it's like, yeah, Pride and Prejudice is a good story, but I'm really more into Charlotte Lucas than I am into Mr. Darcy, so But this book is really a lot of fun, and it is perfect for anyone who loves to read and is able to laugh at themselves for it. So that is it for the Classics book tag. I will be listing my tags down below. Comment down below if you've read any of these classics, if you liked or disliked them, or maybe if you have any recommendations of books that you think that I would like to read. Also, don't forget, if you enjoyed this video, to give it a thumbs up and click on the subscribe button if you'd like to see more. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!